I want to introduce myself. My name is Kinyora Parham. I'm the Executive Director of NRAPE on campus, and I'm joined by my colleague Sylvia Zenteno, Director of Education and Training at It's On Us. And we'd like to welcome you to Zoom University, a Self-Care Survivor Series. Stemming out of COVID-19, we came together to form a community for students and survivors as a means to share helpful resources and tools through somewhat like a virtual course collection, if you will, of webinars and workshops. So before we get started, I just want to remind you that you could feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourself, ask any questions that come along throughout the webinar. And also want to let you know that this is being recorded. So feel free to turn on or off your cameras if you wish, but if you just know that it's being recorded and we will have this ready at a later time, so you might be featured on that recording. But I also want to let you know that Sylvia is also managing the chat box. So as I introduce our facilitator for today, we will be facilitating the chat box and helping with all technology needs. So if anything comes across, feel free to ask us direct questions if you need to, and the like. So let's get started. So today's webinar, Future Now, Laying the Groundwork for an Inclusive, Comprehensive, Transformative Campus Culture, will be facilitated by Holly Rider-Milkovich, who's the Vice President of Impact and Education at EVERFI. EVERFI serves as an organization's subject matter expert on sexual and gender-based discrimination, harassment, and violence. Previously, Holly directed the Sexual Assault Prevention and Awareness Center at the University of Michigan, and Holly provided expertise to President Obama's White House Task Force on best practices for campus-based sexual and intimate partner violence prevention and response efforts, and represented 4-year colleges and universities in the Federal Negotiated Rulemaking Committee for the 2013 Violence Against Women Act reauthorization. She brings over 2 decades of experience in violence prevention and response in higher education to her role at EVERFI. Therefore, I'd like to welcome Holly.
Thank you so much. I am really excited to be joining NRAPE on campus, and It's On Us to share some ideas and what I hope will be catalysts for the kind of transformation that I know that student activists as well as prevention professionals are really seeking on college campuses. Here at EVERFI, we have been proud to be partnered with It's On Us for over 3 years now, hoping to really support student advocates, prevention professionals, student leaders, and campus administrators to really create the best work possible on their campuses. And that's what we're really going to focus on today. So I am calling this webinar Future Now because my goal for this webinar is to demonstrate that some of those best practices in prevention, that which we know is going to create the kind of change that we want to see on our campuses and in our communities to make them safer, more respectful, more equitable, is already happening in some places. And so here's the tagline: if it's happening somewhere, it can happen here. And I hope that's one of the messages you're going to take home. All right, so Sylvia, thank you so much for running my slides, and we can go forward. Okay. Thank you. All right, so this is what we're going to talk about today in the next 60 minutes or so. I think it's important that you know how we're coming to this information. So we're going to talk a little bit about the instrument that EVERFI has used with over 100 institutions at this point to learn about some of the practices that are happening across the country. And then we're going to really talk about what are we learning from those institutions that really are engaging in those best practices in prevention. So we're going to walk through what we see as the bedrock of prevention, how prevention is institutionalized, analyzed. We're going to look at how institutions are identifying whether or not the work they're doing is effective, and how they're sharing that with the community. Then we're going to dive deeper into what some folks think of as, the work of prevention, but which we know is a lot deeper, which is the programming elements. We're going to talk about some key takeaways, and then I hope that we'll have an opportunity to talk about how we might be able to, how you might be able to enact this on your campus. All right, so let's go ahead and go forward. Lots to do. All right, so the first thing that I want to share is a little bit about the instrument that we call the Sexual Assault Diagnostic Inventory. And this is a tool that EVERFI launched in 2016, and again, has been used by over 100 campuses across the country, big, small, rural, large, public, private, to really look at how campuses are doing this work. And so when we are developing this tool, what we wanted to do is not benchmark what other campuses are doing against each other alone, but to really set that standard about what does the research literature tell us is most likely to create change, and have that be the standard by which we measure all colleges and universities' prevention efforts through this tool. And so you can see here some of the things that we used to examine that research literature. Now let's go ahead and move forward. Thank you. So when we were looking at this research literature, and I'll tell you, hint, hint, excited that we're going to be updating this for 2021, because there's a ton more research that's even come out since then. And we've continued to add to the body of information that informs the diagnostic inventory. But we were looking at, we gathered 315 recommendations, collapsed them into 22 categories with 117 recommendations for colleges and universities. And we also not only looked at that peer-reviewed research literature, which is the gold standard for research that we see, we also know that because this content is continuing to evolve, we want to stay on top of what's really happening out in the field as well. And so we're also doing conversations with key stakeholders like End Rape on Campus and It's On Us, National Sexual Violence Resource Center, CalCASA, other thought leaders in the field, looking at the work that they're doing as well to make sure that what we are identifying as the best practice that we want all campuses to strive towards, that reflects what is currently happening in the field. You can go ahead. All right, and this is our framework for the best practice in prevention. Now, what a lot of people think when they think about prevention, like they think about this piece that is just at the top, programming, what we're doing for whom, how we are reaching individuals. And that is a really important part. But here's the thing that I have discovered in 25 years of work in this field, in which I have heard over and over again from student advocates on campus. If you don't have the bedrock support of your institution, that system-wide buy-in, the infrastructure, and really important, the staffing and the funding, the amazing work that often happens propelled by student activists ends up not being able to be sustained for the long term and actually have that kind of catalytic impact that we want to see. So when we at EVERFI are looking at prevention, we want to really think about what is the foundation that supports this work across the system, so that all those individuals who are a part of the community have equal access and opportunity to participate in this work, to learn information, to build skills, and to share what they know and their experiences with others. We want to look at how how that bedrock foundation of institutionalization then gets reinforced by policies and by mandates. So, all the money in the world for prevention efforts, if they're not then reinforced by mandates and policies, ends up not being really very effective. So we're going to look at that. We want to make sure that for those campuses that are engaging either with the their peer educators, which I'll talk about more, or with their staff, but that staff actually has that deep expertise to be able to translate the information in effective ways. We need to make sure that campuses are actually asking that critical question. Is this working? How will I know? How will I make changes going forward with the information that I learn? All of that is about evaluation and assessment. So all of that is a part of the prevention best practices that lead up to programming. I think of those critical processes kind of like the glue between institutionalization and programming. And that programming is really looking at what has the CDC and some of the really foundational work from Dr. Mari Nation and his colleagues telling us about what effective prevention programming needs to include in order to create that kind of behavior, attitude, and belief change that we know actually moves us from increasing our knowledge to changing our behavior. All right, roll forward. So overall, this is what we have seen in our work. And we also do an alcohol diagnostic inventory as well, which I'm not going to talk about, but which I think does have a lot of overlap with efforts to end sexual assault on campus and is really a part of ensuring a safe, respectful, equitable campus community. Lots more to say about that, but focusing for a minute on the sexual assault diagnostic inventory, these were some of the things that we really looked at, some of the sample items from that comprehensive assessment. And we looked at campuses across a quartile system. And so we had some campuses that we refer to in their results as being emerging. Some, they're in the bottom quartile. They're really just getting started. We hope they're getting started on those prevention efforts. They're just beginning to grow, developing, and proficient. And I'm going to focus now on advanced, because what you're going to see for the rest of this webinar is looking at those campuses that are achieving in the upper quartile of our diagnostic instrument in the work that they're doing in sexual assault prevention. And I'll share with you that we actually do award campuses who achieve advanced standards with our sexual assault impact awards. And so we have given out 13 of those in the past 3 years to campuses. And if you are on a campus that has received an impact award, give a shout out, because that is absolutely a reflection of a campus-wide commitment to this work. You can go ahead and go forward, please. Awesome. So as I said before, and this is just to make sure that we're keeping honest with ourselves and with you. Why is it that we think that what we're going to share actually means anything for institutions that you're coming from? Well, one of the reasons why is that we actually have a pretty good representative sample. So I'm really proud of the fact that in the participating institution sample that we have balanced participation from all parts of the country, because we know that where you are can sometimes impact how you do the prevention work. We have a mix of public, private, and a mix of size as well. Now, one of the things you might notice is like, oh my gosh, half of your sample are from small institutions, under 5,000 students. Fun fact, half of the institutions in the United States, or a little bit less, but almost half of the institutions in the United States are under 5,000. Sometimes we think about small colleges as just being, the folks that are kind of the run-alongs with the big colleges and universities. But what we've learned is that most students in the United States, are being educated in community colleges, the majority of students, and also are being educated at small colleges. So want to know, we see you small colleges, we know you're small but mighty. But there's also a great representation from those medium and large size institutions, as well as urban, suburban, and rural, because that really can have an impact as well. You can go ahead. All right, so let's dive in on that bedrock of prevention. So we've talked, you can go ahead and go for it. So we've talked a little bit about what we mean when we're thinking about that institutionalization. And these are the kind of questions that we asked that lead to the information that I'm going to share. We looked at, and like, I'm just going to say, prepare to have your mind blown here. We looked at questions around total full-time employees for prevention staff. So, how much is the institution investing in prevention in their staffing? What the total budget is for prevention outside of staffing. And then, some people are like, what do you mean, what's the prevention budget outside of staffing? Isn't that the prevention budget? Aha. Too often it is, but it shouldn't be. We look at that outward commitment from senior leaders, whether or not prevention related to sexual assault, health, safety, and well-being is a part of the institutional strategic plan and mission. And we look to see whether or not there is a kind of organized body on campus. So a coordinated campus response team, a task force, a working group, whether or not they're actually doing anything, whether or not they have a direct line to senior leaders, how often they're meeting, and whether or not they're sharing what they're doing with the community. So it's really about places, purse strings, people, and priorities. One of the things that is my total takeaway from my 25 years of work is that institutions are most transparent in their priorities through their budget. The budget is nothing if not the clearest articulation of what is important to an institution. And so we think all of these things are really, really important. You can go ahead and go forward. All right, so as you can see here, when it comes to across the campus, most institutions were falling into that sort of that proficient quartile. Only 10% of institutions are considered advanced. So, question then becomes, what are those advanced institutions doing? And I'm going to pause here and I'm going to ask folks on the webinar, how often do you think your president has spoken directly to the campus community about the importance of sexual assault and gender-based violence prevention in the past year? Not, oh my gosh, not ever, from Lakeisha. What? How could that be? Anyone else? Who has a president who is talking about these issues publicly? Okay, once during orientation, better than none, question mark. Very rare, but performative. Oh, Jessica, that is such a great point. Like, making a really big deal about one conversation in public. I hear you. Well, we're going to go ahead and go forward. Let me share with you what we're learning. All right, if you could, I'm not sure if my screen is stuck. If you could move, thank you so much, Sylvia. Okay, so this is what we've learned for presidents' voices are so incredibly important because they align institution resources, they align institution priorities, and that when presidents talk about an issue as being important, it opens up all kinds of avenues for transformation that would not otherwise be available. That is the reason why it is so important that we hear presidents' voices in an informed way on these specific issues. And so we are looking at presidents to be speaking at least 2 times when it comes to sexual assault prevention, and for vice presidents of student affairs, certainly something that is within their wheelhouse and very important, to be speaking at least 2 times. And this is what we're learning, is that even for our advanced institutions, presidents are only talking about these issues 2 times a year, 71% of the time. Vice presidents, they're doing a little bit more. But campuses across the country, if you're on a campus or as a student or as a prevention professional and you're like, gosh, when is the last time our president spoke about this issue? You are not alone. Half of institutions had 1 or fewer times that presidents were speaking about this issue. And you know what? This is what I think is so important about this. So I've already shared why we want for presidents to speak, but there's one other really important piece as well. There is actually research that demonstrates that when presidents talk about this issue in an informed way, it actually has the measurable effect of changing people's perceptions about the importance of sexual and gender-based violence prevention and harassment prevention on their campus. And it reinforces that they have a role to play. So when presidents talk about they don't have a budget to be able to do more prevention work, what I have to say about that is, you know what? Your speech is free. Or rather, we've already paid for it with your salary. Talking about these issues actually makes a positive impact in the community when it's done well and in a non-informed, performative and informative way. And this is something that any president can do. They just have to make the commitment to do it. And the same is true for vice presidents. All right, let's go ahead and go forward. Okay, so let's talk about prevention budget. I'm not even going to ask you what you think your campus is spending on prevention budget, because most folks, when I've asked that question, say, I have no idea. But let's just like take a gander at what we're learning here. What we have discovered is that most institutions outside of the money that they spend on staffing, they're only spending $3.79 per student. For our large institutions, for our 10,000 students or higher, they're only spending $1.21. So every time I walk across a campus and I see the bagel giveaway, the spiritware giveaway, every time I see a stadium that is filled with t-shirts all of the same color, I think to myself, $1, $2, $3, $5, all of these things, which may have really valid purposes outside of prevention, folks are willing to spend the money there. We want for people to also be spending money on prevention. The way in which prevention efforts are able to be enacted and able to continue is that there's actually budget dollars behind it. And what we can see is that most campuses are spending less than a cup of coffee. Like, I can't even get a pumpkin spice latte for what most campuses are spending on prevention. When we get to the advanced institutions, those that are scoring that top 25%, you can see a huge jump, that institutions that are able to do this advanced level work in prevention are spending more money to be able to do it. So when you're thinking about where am I going to put my prevention advocacy, I would put it at the funding, stable funding and stable staffing for prevention efforts, to be able to make sure that your institution has that framework to make your work meaningful and to be able to sustain it for the long term. Looking at the staffing, you can see that one for every 10,000 students is what the aggregate average is for prevention. And at the advanced, it's one for every 1,200 students. Now, why is that prevention staffing important? Well, that's really important because what we are going to see when we get to the programming section is that so much of the work that needs to happen as it relates to prevention is really very detailed work. It's got to focus on specific student communities. It's got to be tailored to those communities. It's got to be delivered by voices that make a difference in those specific communities. We cannot be at a one size fits everyone for everything. That is absolutely not going to work. And what does that take? The expertise and the time of prevention staff. So for all of you prevention professionals who are on the call, and I saw a number of you come in, I just want you to know we see you and we know how hard your work is, and we think there need to be a lot more of you on campuses across the country. Go ahead and go forward if we could. So how do we then make transformation on this issue? I talked already about if I was going to put my advocacy time and effort into one place, I would be putting it right here at this bedrock foundation, because that's going to pay dividends upward in all the kind of ways. So how do you make that happen? Our recommendation is that you align that commitment or the ask for that commitment to prevention to these sort of institutional priorities, these mission critical issues, really talking the talk of those campus administrators and demonstrating to your senior leadership on campus that the work of sexual and gender-based violence prevention is essential to your mission. Because if you don't do it well, there are lots of potential mission critical pitfalls that an institution can fall into. And maybe you're at a campus that your institution has already hit some of these pitfalls. So we can see, talking about it as it relates to brand and as it relates to reputation, what we're learning is that more and more future students, so students who are juniors and seniors in college or in high school rather, they're saying, look, a safe, inclusive, respectful campus is actually important to me. Demonstrate to me that this is something that you're committed to. Having an investment in sexual assault prevention is one fantastic way to do that. Certainly, safety, liability, and risk management. I am not somebody that likes to go down this could be a litigation issue, but the fact of because I personally find that to be not a super exciting thing to get on board with, but the fact of the matter is this is something that campuses are thinking about. And so making sure that that's a part of the conversation can help perhaps some administrators who aren't moved in other ways to see the importance of doing this work. And there's more information here about regulations, policy, and compliance. But, here's the last one. Like, how many of you have heard your provost talk about the importance of ensuring that every student on campus has an amazing educational experience, that we retain them, and that we graduate them on time? Is there anyone on the campus, on this call rather, who has heard that from their provost or has heard that on their campus? All right, thanks, Teresa. I appreciate that you chiming in here. So I'm hoping that other folks are hearing that as well. And when you do, this is a great time to say, oh, hey, you want to increase retention on campus? Investing in sexual assault prevention is a fantastic way to do so, making sure that students who arrive on campus never having experienced violence graduate with a violence-free experience on our campus, and for those who have, that they continue to get the support they need to never re-experience violence. That's a fantastic way to increase retention, because trauma of any kind, and sexual assault trauma, is a significant factor to students decreasing their academic performance, decreasing their engagement across a wide variety of areas, and stopping out or leaving the institution altogether. So if campuses are counting all of the butts in seats when it comes to this really, really treacherous time for admissions, they should be thinking about sexual assault prevention. All right, let's go ahead and go forward. And we also need to make sure that we are thinking about improving institutionalization across the entire system. So this is one kind of, chart to think about how we can really do that. And, think about, where is your institution? Maybe you're an institution that is, you hear the question asked, how can we be leading the field on this? So you're innovators. Fantastic. This is an opportunity to then take this information and say, look, if we actually want to walk the talk and be leaders in this field, we need to minimally do these kinds of efforts. We need to increase our funding around these issues. If you're potentially a late majority campus, one of the questions you tend to ask is, are most students doing this, or are our peer institutions doing this? Connect with me, because I can share with you what generally speaking peer institutions are doing around this area. What you can say to a president who asks, are other presidents talking about this issue? You can say, 50% of the colleges across the country, their presidents are talking about this 2 or more times, and it's been demonstrated to have impact and change. This is something that we can do. So here are some ideas of how you can really start to work on that institutionalization. And we've offered some grassroots strategies below. So of course, I freaking love student newspapers. Student newspapers are not afraid to ask those tough questions, and student reporters are not afraid to ask those tough questions. So if there's anybody on the student newspaper out there, thank you for the hard work you're doing. Even when you're causing trouble, that's the work you're supposed to be doing. Definitely campus events, be they virtual or eventually I hope we'll be back in person again. Building a coalition, making sure that we're including others in this work. Sharing information about what you've learned with the campus. All are ways to elevate this grassroots strategies. All right, let's go ahead and go forward. Okay, so critical process question. I put the but does it work because that's the question that I wish every campus was asking about all of the efforts that they do, whether it be in person or online. You can go ahead and go forward, please, Sylvia. Thank you very much. But does it work? Because if we are taking those hard fought dollars and sinking them into things that are less likely to be successful, then we've really undermined a lot of our advocacy efforts. So taking that investment in prevention and placing it in efforts that are likely to be effective, and then testing to make sure it works and sharing it with others is a critical component. And that's what these critical processes do. Fundamentally, we're looking at, our campuses actually gathering data about their efforts? Do they have goals that they're aligned with? Are they evaluating it? Are they including students in those impacted communities in those kinds of efforts? And are they building skills? So these are the kind of things that we're looking at. If you can go ahead and go forward. Fantastic. So you can see here that most institutions are really far behind when it comes to these critical processes. Most institutions are in the lower half of this work. And that is not a surprise to me. And it's also like the reason I put my feet on the floor in the morning. I think that we need to get a lot more rigorous and really hold institutions accountable for ensuring that what they're delivering to students is been tested for efficacy, that you're gathering information. So, and when you do that, it becomes not just a check the box, I'm going to address this compliance issue. The second you start evaluating this work, the second you start asking for data and using that data to create change, you've now elevated all of your prevention efforts across the board. But this is this critical processes piece is where I want to go back to the staffing piece as well, because all of these things, when we're looking at one prevention person trying to deliver prevention efforts to 10,000 students or 20,000 students, that the first thing that goes out the door, I can tell you right now, is this kind of next level work. And so, looking at this is where I want for us to close the gap the most, to make for those institutions that are already investing those dollars, make those dollars meaningful. And for those who are not yet investing those dollars, when they get there, investing them in the places that really matter. You can go ahead and go forward. Okay, so this data is exactly what I'm talking about. Advanced institutions. So again, let's remember the future is now. Institutions are already doing this. So every institution can also do this. Selecting a program based on demonstrated efficacy or having a theory of change, as in understanding how the programming is designed to work and how it's intended to create those behavioral outcomes, that it has learning and behavioral outcomes and they know how to measure it. So 91% of those institutions that are doing advanced work in prevention are making programmatic decisions based on this. The rest of us, 37%. So what does that mean? what then, if they're not basing it on efficacy, what in the world are they making these decisions on? Well, good question. It might be, um, I know this already, and so I might not know if it works, but what I know is that I'm able to do it. And I understand that as someone who worked for 10 years on a college campus. Sometimes the get it done is the first priority. But I really encourage us to move towards making programmatic decisions that we believe have evidence that they will actually create change. That is really important. And it's a great question to ask. Every student advocate on this call, ask your senior leadership, ask your prevention professionals on campus, what is the evidence that this may work? What is the theory of change that you're using to make this decision? If your prevention professionals are not able to answer that, that's a great place for you to really partner with them to make this a priority, to say, look, we want to be making decisions based on evidence, and we're going to make this a priority for our institution together. Relying upon data. So taking for many campuses, because of the VAWA amendments to the Clery Act, all college and university students have to be given the opportunity to participate in sexual assault prevention programming when they become new students. And the same is true for all employees. There's not a mandate that all students or all employees actually complete it, but they have to be given the opportunity. And so many colleges and universities use online programs to be able to do that work. And that's my work. I help create and work for an organization that delivers to many campuses across the country. Now, the question is, for any campus that's using that population-wide online training, are they gathering data about students' perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs, as well as their behavior? Or are they only gathering data about whether or not students increased their knowledge, or are they gathering no data at all? If they're not gathering any data at all, what a missed opportunity. That is like the table stakes to this conversation. We want for campuses, when they're delivering any kind of universal population education, to be gathering data about their community, and then key factor here, use that data to be able to inform the work that they're doing going forward, so that the prevention efforts that are happening on campus are really informed by the experiences, by the beliefs of their specific students. For sure, as we work at EVERFI with literally 3 million college students across the country and 1,500 colleges and universities, what we know is that no single one is the same. And so it's really important to have that specific campus data to be able to reinforce that. You can go ahead and go forward. All right, and so this is what we've learned about those critical processes, is that only 38% of campuses are engaged in a strategic strategic planning process, and only 24, like, check this out, only 24% of colleges and universities are using a logic model to inform their prevention programming. What is a logic model? A logic model is basically the effort that says, if we do this, we're going to put in this kind of prevention effort, and we expect this kind of outcome, and this is how we're going to measure it. If only 40% actually have SMART goals. And what do those SMART goals do? They actually ensure that that you are trying to achieve something at all versus doing a thing. Like, doing a thing is not a thing unless you actually have a goal that you're trying to achieve. You can go ahead and go forward. So how do we improve that critical processes component? Too often, we're looking at going from what are the resources available, how are we going to spend those resources, and what's going to happen? Go ahead and go forward if you could. We want to flip it to actually start with, what is it that we need to achieve? what are the efforts that we're going to do to get us there? And then what resources do we need in order to achieve these outcomes? When we flip from starting at, this is what I have, this is what I'm going to do, and I hope I get to this, to we need to achieve this outcome. We think these are the activities that are going to be able to achieve this outcome, and this is what we need to get there. You go from the early model, when you start with inputs, is a deficit model. The model where you start with outcomes is a strength-based model, and that's really essential. When you are thinking about how we're going to do this work, start with outcomes, don't start with inputs. If you start with inputs, you're already starting with too narrow a window. Here's the other cool thing about starting with outcomes, is that once you get everybody on board with what outcomes you agree as a community you want, when you get to the input section, you've made a much stronger case for why it is you need additional resources, because people aren't going to go back and say, actually, the outcomes we decided upon aren't so much important, so therefore we don't need more inputs. That's just not going to happen, or at least it's a lot less likely to happen. All right, go ahead and go forward. And just as a reminder, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about goals. You probably already know this, but we are talking about them being specific, measurable, attainable. And, you know, the attainable, pause to talk about this a little bit. Attainable means, like, if we're setting goals that are not likely to be able to be achieved with the information or the resources that we have, what happens is that when they're not achieved, people tend to divest in the belief that prevention is even possible. It's that attainable piece probably isn't talked about enough, but you want to make sure that you're actually making relevant and attainable goals so that you're able to hit them, so that you're able to continue to get that community buy-in for the importance of prevention. And of course, they need to be relevant. And this is where making sure that students are a part of the conversation about those goals is really important, and making sure that the data is a part of it. And of course, there has got to be a timeline. Fixing everything in some kind of forever window means that nobody ever does anything. And that's just the truth of the matter. So anyway, SMART goals, really, really important. Let's roll ahead and go forward. What does this then look like? When we're thinking about SMART goals, I want to get really specific, because I'll tell you, when I was pretty far along in my prevention career, I was still doing the kind of goals on the left-hand side. Like, I would set as a goal, and I even wrote a grant around this, right? Engage more students as bystanders who will take action. Awesome goal, real, like it's relevant. It is, but is it measurable, and is it specific, and is it timely? No. So how do we reframe that? Increase self-reported bystander intervention behaviors by 25% at the end of the 2019-2020 year. What did we do? What we did was we changed engage more students into something that actually had a means to demonstrate how students were engaged. It was measurable, and we knew when we were going to actually be measuring it. And there's another example as well that's related to awareness and support. So not only do I encourage you to be building these kind of SMART goals, but man, this is a great place to hold institutions accountable. So say you've got on your campus a task force, a working group, which is awesome, is really important. Take a look at the goals that they're sending out, what they're saying that they're actually going to do with the community, and ask those questions. Is this specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely? Do we know how we're going to measure it? Do we know and the time frame in which we expect for these things to happen? If you don't have a time, again, if you don't have a time frame designated, if you don't have something specific you're going to measure, there's no way to hold yourself or others accountable. All right. Last but not least, rounding us home in the last 10 minutes, let's talk about programming. So for those on the call, how many of you are participating in delivering programming to colleagues as student peer educators, and or how many of you are prevention practitioners and working to support those peer educators on campus? Who's doing that out there? Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. That's amazing. Yay, Teresa. Awesome. Aram, fantastic. Oh, it's exciting to see this. I love it. Okay, so my people, here's the good news. If you're doing this work on campus, this is something awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. This is something that we know actually has a basis in efficacy with a couple caveats. We're going to get to that. So let's go ahead and go forward. All right, so this is so important. What are we talking about when we are talking about programming? We are talking about making sure that those individuals who are most likely to experience harm, most likely to potentially be at risk for committing harm, are getting specific programming that is designed to meet their needs. We want to know about whether or not they are getting the relevant programming often enough for it to actually have impact. We want to know that it's informed, it's got a trauma-informed basis, because so many of our campus community members have already experienced one or more forms of violence, and we need to be responsive to that. We want to know that there is actually some teeth behind the participation, so that there is high levels of participation on campus, which often means mandatory, and bling, bing, bing, we want to see peer educators being a part of this conversation. All right, let's go ahead and go forward. Okay, you can see here, this is a place where campuses are doing better, but wow, that jump from being proficient to be advanced, only 5% of college campuses are registering as advanced in this area. So let's figure out where some of those places where they fall down are. Let's go ahead and go forward. So again, here are programming insights. Like, I'm going to start on the right hand. So training for peer educators. When I was at the University of Michigan, we had 150 plus peer educators as a part of our program, which was such an incredible honor that students were identifying this as being something that was really important. That they were investing their time in that kind of effort for the campus community. But we would not be doing our jobs if we didn't prepare peer educators to be successful in the role we were asking them to play. And what does that preparing the peer educators for success mean? It means that peer educators are being trained and they're being supervised on a regular basis, and that this is happening ongoing. So because, number one, we want to make sure that skills are continuing to grow. We know that peer educators, when they're interacting in community, learn things, and it creates an iterative process to feed information back to the program. And also, man, sticky stuff comes up, and you need to have supervision to be able to understand how to address that issue, to process it, and to be able to learn from it going forward. 100% of institutions that are doing the best work possible are training their peer educators for at least 10 hours. And you know what? I got to tell you, most of these campuses, it's way more than 10 hours. It's more like 20 hours plus. Like, this is not a 2-session learning in order to be able to actually be prepared to do this work well. When we look at what the rest of the campuses are doing, that aggregate average, fewer than half are providing training for those peer educators that are 10 hours or more. Now, I'm going to just say one thing here as well. Something that we've not measured yet, but I want to name as an important best practice, is that peer educators be compensated in some form, be that through credit hours, being able to take a credit, 4-credit class, having a stipend, or being paid by the hour, to be compensated for the time in which they do this work. And the reason why, for me, this is so important is that I do think that it's an equity issue. When we have peer educators on campuses who are not able to, in some way, be compensated for that time, it ends up really excluding a lot of individuals who need to work in order to support themselves, their families, or pay for college. And it ends up becoming a nice to have instead of a must have. And what we know is that for peer educators, including making sure that there's a really diverse and representative peer education population is essential to actually peer educators being able to do that work well. And so eliminating barriers for peer educators to be involved is something that's really important. So I know how hard that is with already stretched dollars. And so I would say that if you're on a campus where that is not already happening, maybe set that as a goal or start talking about the reasons why it's so important to help make that change on your campus to bring that future home. Okay, so that's what we've learned about peer educators. Just really quickly, that frequency about in-person programming. You have to actually receive the messages, get the training and the skills on a regular basis. Otherwise, the effect wears off. You know, it's kind of like getting that flu shot. You have to get those boosters or you are inoculated against committing or standing by when sexual violence occurs. And so we want to make sure that students are getting programming on a regular basis. But yeah, let's look at this. So on the left-hand side, when we're thinking about who's receiving that targeted information, who's getting specific information that addresses their needs and responds to the fact that some campus students on campus are more vulnerable to experiencing or committing harm than other students, right? What we see on the left-hand side is that most folks are reaching all first-year students. Thank goodness. Well, we have a federal mandate around that. Most resident advisors who serve as mentors so often, they're getting it as well. That is fantastic. Most athletes are, student leaders, and even a lot of, the majority of Greek life are receiving that kind of targeted training. That is fantastic. But when you look at the right-hand side, LGBTQ students who have already experienced some form of harm, students who are BIPOC students with disabilities, students who are non-traditional students, like no advanced campuses are reaching out to non-traditional students. Less than 20% are reaching out to students who are specifically delivering programming to students who are part of racial or ethnic minority groups. That is something that we have to change. When I talk about comprehensive and inclusive campus culture, that means getting students what they need in specific ways. And we have a huge gap to fill here. Every campus who wants to say that they are doing comprehensive prevention work needs to be looking at all of these campus communities. Let's go ahead and go forward if we could. And just to drill down here, we do see that most campuses are using peer educators to support their prevention work. But when we're talking about any supervision at all, almost 30% are not getting any kind of supervision. As student advocates, you deserve more, and I hope that you can use this information to connect and to partner with your program on campus to help create the capacity so that you get that supervision that you need and that you get the training that you need. This should be 100% across the board. Otherwise, we're not setting you up to be able to do your jobs well. And last but not least, rounding us home. Improving programming. What does the best research literature looking at prevention work across the board tell us that we need to do? If you needed to have a checklist, I'm giving it to you right here. And in fact, I've already shared this deck so that Sylvia and Kenyora can share it out with you to be able to take this home. These are the things that we want to see. And I'm not going to walk through all of them. But this is a great checkbox for you to do with your own prevention efforts to make sure that you're actually doing all of these things, and for you to use in partnership with those teams on campus that are also delivering this kind of effort. They should have all of these elements as a part of it in order to ensure that it's as effective as it can be. All right, and let me go ahead and go forward. All right, so key takeaways. in the last second, what I hope you're taking from this, you can go ahead and go forward. Thank you. If you want that future right now, if you want to be an advanced campus, if you want to be doing the best work possible, these are the things that I hope you heard from this webinar. I want that there needs to be institutional buy-in from senior leaders. We need to make sure that those critical processes are in place to make that investment in people, in time, and in resources really matter, to make sure that the work that you're doing is effective and you're sharing it on campus. And that program, the programming needs to be evidence and theory based, specific to individual, institution, and community needs, reach all students and reach those who are highest at risk. It cannot be a one size fits everyone. We have to do both that population level and that specific kind of education. So with that, I hope that this has been a useful time for you. I know that for some folks, you're going to be dropping off. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. So call to action. What do you think you might do with this effort going forward? If you want to go ahead and share on the way out the door to inspire others on this call, I'd love to hear it.
And Holly, there was a question about, oh, there it is. Teresa actually asked, does EVERFI have a program for peer educators?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. Great question. We do not have a program specifically for peer educators. I believe that Jennifer Henkel from NASPA is actually on the call, and I want to just send folks to the peer education programs that they have through the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators. I hope that I got that right, which has a really great peer education program across a number of different issues. So I would send you their way. They do great work. And of course, NRAPE on campus has fantastic education programming, like we've been involved with for student activists on campus.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions coming through the chat. Let me actually restart my video.
All right. Let's see. So Sylvia Canora, if you wouldn't mind sharing my email address in the chat, whomever has been a part of this conversation, if you would like to follow up, happy to have you contact me directly. This is the best part of my job is actually to engage with colleagues, future, current, who care about this issue. So would welcome your feedback.
Thank you so much, Holly. Oh, we actually have another question that just came through. How frequently were the peer educators receiving supervision? I missed that bit.
Great question, Raven. Bi-weekly is what we like to see. Bi-weekly is best practice, or more. You are welcome.
Awesome. If there are no other, one more, yep. How can peer educators move forward with the recent change in Title IX?
Okay, so that totally depends. So peer educators, so here's an important thing about, okay, we're already, so, you know, for those of you who need to jump off, cool, but I'm just gonna like go get a little bit in depth here. So the recent changes to Title IX primarily impact how institutions respond and the kinds of policies that are in place. They really had almost no impact on the requirements related to prevention, which is what we see peer educators really being involved in. So how it impacts peer educators, I'd say the first thing that peer educators need to be doing is to be reminding the institution our requirements under Clery Act for prevention have not changed. And, we might not be living fully into them now, but what's for sure is that those remain and they have not changed. So for me, that is the most important message when it comes to prevention, is that we need to be pedal to the metal doing the work that we're supposed to be doing, regardless of what's happening with Title IX. Now, one of the things that you might see as an adjustment is that institutions are revising policies or revising practices or procedures, you want to make sure that as a peer educator, you know what those are, because as I've experienced, peer educators get lots of really important questions when you're out in community about the way that campuses do this work. And it's important that the institution prepare you to be able to knowledgeably respond to that, because you want for students to have the information so that if ever they're in a situation where they're responding or have to make difficult decisions about what they want to do following an incident of harm, they have accurate information to be able to make that decision.
Thank you, Holly. And
Yeah.
another question comes from Sherry. The Chronicle of Higher Education recently did a poll to see what schools are doing for sexual assault prevention. Did you see it, and any takeaways from that?
I didn't see it, but thank you for asking me that question. You're going to send me right to it, and I'd say email me and let's talk about it in about an hour, because I'm going to go there now. So thank you.
And another question comes from Kay Richardson, and they ask, how do you think the shift to virtual learning impacts prevention efforts?
Oh, great question. And man, this is something that we've been thinking about a ton at EVERFI. And we, in fact, just put together something called the CPN Campus Prevention Network Seal of Prevention, because what I've shared with you really has had a focus on both online and in-person training. And what we're seeing is that there needs to be some expectations set for how these prevention best practices translate into the online environment. From our perspective, all of those pieces that we're looking at for prevention programming best practices do have a virtual component. It's just that we have to make that translation. What I am seeing right now is that it's a little bit of the Wild West. We were not prepared for a totally, as a field, we were not prepared for a totally online environment. And so I really want to commend students out there and commend my other prevention colleagues for the kind of innovation that you're doing. What I would ask of all of us, again, kind of going back to what I talked about in the webinar, is that as we're doing that innovation, let's also be gathering information about what is working, both in formal and in informal ways, so that we can actually have informed conversations with each other and build that body of practice about the online environment. I think we could come out of this with some really incredible new approaches that are going to address some access and equity issues that our community has struggled with for a very long time. Parents, parents of small children who are students, students who are on online, universities have not had, and those are just some examples, have not had the same kinds of opportunities to engage in prevention as students who are traditional students on campus. We have a chance to change that for the better coming out of this, and I hope that we gather the information to allow us to do so in an informed way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Holly. If there are no more questions, I definitely want to direct you all to the email address that I have provided for you on behalf of Holly, where you can connect with her directly. But I definitely want to say thank you so much, Holly, for your expertise and your wisdom in this work. I am very, very honored to be working alongside you and having you work with us on a multiple of different workshops that we've encountered so far. And I hope that we continue our partnership in the future. But thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I hope that you continue to stay safe, stay healthy. Remember to wash your hands, wear your masks, and continue to do the great work that you're doing in this field as well on behalf of survivors and students. So thank you and have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.